sadly, I think, there's a lot of people within my tribe. So I'm within, the Reformed tradition, Reformed soteriology. So I'm Reformed Baptist, 1689 confessional. And I've been disappointed over the last 2 years as we've had, civil tyranny. We've had all these different things, plaguing the American people and really across the globe. I hoped that my tribe, due to the Protestant resistance theory, guys like John Knox and the Scottish Reformers, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. These kinds of glorious sayings. I thought that we would have the theological framework to really lead the charge in terms of civil disobedience in obedience to Christ. And to my surprise, it's a bunch of Calvary Chapel guys. And I'm grateful for Calvary Chapel. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's not my tribe. They're more Arminian, they're less Reformed, and it's, Jack Hibbs, and it's all these, it's my point is, it's like there's this big game of musical chairs right now and everything, because every institution has discredited itself, whether it be the media, whether it be pharmacies, whether it be, government, academia, all these. And sadly, the evangelical church is not exempt from this providential move of God, where every major institution, it's like, you're seeing the guy pulling the levers behind the curtain. And so people are moving. So I've got all of a sudden, we were in California. I left brought about 20 people with me at the end of 2020 to plant a new church here in Texas, where I was born and raised. And by God's grace, we've gone from 20 people to 120 in just a year and a half. But a lot of the people in our church are not. I'm used to pastoring Calvinists, to just say it frankly. And I've got a lot of people they're like, I don't know about that Calvinism thing. I don't know if I like that. But what I like about your church is that you'll go and you'll preach out front of the courthouse when there's some kind of, event happening, and you guys don't wear masks, and you guys don't shut down. And you guys, you know what I mean? And so it's like, there's these new fault lines, like Bodhi Baucham wrote his book, Fault Lines. And so it's like, all of a sudden there's a shift in these things. Yeah. And so I say all that back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees to say, Tim Keller. All right. So that was a long lead up to say, so Tim Keller is Reformed in his soteriology, and he's somebody that I really enjoyed once upon a time. But his third wayism, I don't know how familiar you are with Tim Keller, but it's always like, well, there's this and there's that, and there's Jesus, there's this and there's that, and then there's Jesus. And it's always this third way. And he always did that with politics. There's conservatives and there's liberals, Republicans and Democrats, and then there's Jesus. The impression, though, that I think a lot of people got, including myself, because I bought into this for a time, is Pharisees and Sadducees. So I'm taking your analogy, but I'm applying it now to the two parties in our system. The impression that we got was, okay, Republicanism is not that. The Republican Party and its policies are not synonymous with the Bible. No Christian would say that they are. But the impression that people come away with is that their Democrats and Republican policies are equally distant from the Bible. And so I think there's a lot of young voters and a lot of young Christians that are all of a sudden, it's like the veil has been lifted, and that lie, that third wayism kind of thing has been really debunked in their minds, and they're coming out with a vengeance. And I would be one of them and saying, okay, there is a culture war, and we do need to fight. And the Bible calls us to fight in a godly manner, but to fight these kinds of things. And so all that, what would you say to somebody, because you talk about the Republican Party and the problems that they have, and sure, there are rhinos and all these different things. But what would you say to someone who says, man, well, Steve, it sounds like there's a lot of problems in the Republican Party. So I feel like it's a toss-up. You could go either way.
I think much of what you're describing, I would describe as a false objection.
Okay.
And that most of the time, in my experience, and I've spent as much time as almost anybody my age. I certainly have not been at this as long as the original religious right guys, or some of the more famous ones that are more in my age group, or a little younger boomer who, in many cases, frankly, I'm not fans of, because they just allow themselves to be reduced to mascots for the Republican Party, as opposed to, someone who represents God's people within that party. Because I do think there's a difference. I'll give you an example of what I mean, so I don't just leave the audience hanging with that. They used to say about Dr. Richard Land, who used to run who was the original head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission at the Southern Baptist Convention before what's his face, whose name I can't remember, basically
Russell
ruined
Moore.
it. Thank you. Yeah. They used to say about Richard Land back in the 80s. He used to go to Washington and tell them what we at the Southern Baptist Convention demanded Republicans do. But nowadays he comes back to Washington and tells the Southern Baptist Convention what we'll be permitted to have. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
Okay. All right. Are you a mascot for a political party? Can you be a Daniel? Can you work within the confines of a political party, but the salt doesn't lose its flavor? And when they ask you to do that or say that or defend that, which God says is clearly wrong, your answer is, that's going to be a no for me, dog. Okay. When you guys are right, I'll go to the mattresses for you. When you're wrong, that's my tap out. Okay. Got a pretty simple standard. As long as when you guys are on the side of righteousness, I'm right there with you. When you're not, I'm not. I think a lot of what there's two things that work with the pastors and the church leadership, I think, and from that are Gen X, my generation, and then older millennials that are now beginning to take over the pulpits. And one is, I think, a sincere concern. They don't want to be the next horse for the Republican Party, if I can just put it very bluntly. Okay. They don't want to be the next Ralph Reeds. They don't want to be the next Richard Jeffress. Or Robert Jeffress, actually. They don't want to be those guys. And I don't want them to be either, by the way. I don't. Okay. And I'm not buddies with any of those kinds of guys. Okay. When I mobilize evangelicals, it's not to sell out a conference or to build my donor base. It was to actually win elections, to move numbers on the ground. That's why I kept being asked to join Iowa caucus campaigns during presidential elections, because me and the people I work with can move numbers on the ground, not just put out press releases, sell out a banquet, and line our pockets. We're actually trying to win. Okay. Right. And so I totally get not wanting to be the next generation of Republican prostitutes, because the party's not worth it anyway. At least Esau got a bowl of stew. You won't even get that from Republican leader. And I tell my audience all the time, you've probably heard me say this, the only political party that hates you more than the Democrats are the Republicans. Because the Democrats, it's just straight up honest hatred of what you believe. You can deal with that. Otherwise, you haven't been a Christian for more than 2 minutes. Okay. Jesus doesn't say, hey, look out for those wolves with their shiny teeth and sharp claws. We know what to do with them. Okay. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. That's the issue. I mean, you're totally fine taking on Nancy Pelosi with a gun at your face. It's Mitch McConnell shaking you in the back. That's what you can't defend yourself against. Because most people that become Democrats run for office to do things. Most people that become Republicans run for office to be somebody. And so you and our people come along and say, hey, we need you to do blank, 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 blank policies. Well, I'm just here to work my side of K Street, bro. I'm not here for you, and vote for me, because if you don't, then the communists will win. They hate your guts. So I'm not here to pump them up or elevate them in any way, shape, or form. Okay. That all being said, though, that's a very small group of pastors that I think are just will directly preach the gospel and right and wrong from the pulpit, but will just not directly politically or culturally engage out of fear of getting co-opted from a political party. Right. I don't blame them for that at all. And frankly, if they just do that first thing of boldly proclaiming the truths of God's word, the rest of pastors weren't politically involved in the 40s, dude, or the 50s, or the 20s, or the 1890s. Okay. They just did their damn job. And, and then the saints left the church and were like, all right, got my marching orders. Now I do my job. Okay. Well, and you did your job. To interject for just a moment, I would say, I personally think, just a little bit of pushback here, that's part of why we're in the boat that we're in. I personally think that there's a lot of Christians who are under the impression that the Bible, it's family in the church, home in the church, home in the church. And so I have this theology. I have this set of principles that applies to my marriage and my parenting, right? Another marriage conference, another parenting conference, another marriage. And it applies to church planting, right? The church planting movement and overseas missions. And it's like the boomers, for instance, I want to, it's hard for me. I'm an older millennial. And so it's hard for me because I want to keep to the fifth commandment, honor thy father and mother. And I don't want to be like the progressives. How hypocritical would it be? That's everything that they're doing is dismantling the work of our fathers, our proverbial fathers, and saying everything they did was wrong and everything they did is bad. That said, so I want to honor boomers as much as I can. That said, though, I think that, boomers sought to fulfill global missions
and their kids grew up and denied the faith and went apostate.
Well, they beat communism abroad only to allow it to be imported to all their institutions here.
So anyways, I'm just saying that I think.
Let me finish my point.
Go ahead.
My point was, because they fulfilled their primary mission of preaching the gospel, the issues of morality were not politicized in their era. It was not considered, the idea that the only people who thought that it was bad to kill your child before it was born would belong to one particular party. And then the people in the other party would not only think it's not bad, but shout their abortions. That would have blown their friggin' minds. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah. Those were moral absolutes. They were universal.
Right.
And that's what kept the two political parties largely in this left of center, right of center sort of narrow Overton window.
Right.
Okay. What's happened is that window's been smashed by the stained glass window smashers, the iconoclasts. And so what's happened is the church wants to remain in the same somewhat politically neutral position it was in so that it doesn't become co-opted. The problem is, though, that what it thinks is the Democratic Party isn't a party, it's a cult.
Right.
Progressivism isn't a political ideology, it is a rival religion.
It's a religion, yeah.
And in no other culture would the church plant itself and then never directly confront the enemy religion to the gospel. I mean, there are the stories of St. Boniface with the Norsemen cutting down the Odin tree right in their faces because he was disgusted with their pagan worship. Right. Okay, the church understood the only way out is through. We have to directly confront the demonic false religions or the pagan transcendent false religions. We have to directly confront them in contrast with the gospel. Mm-hmm. A lot of American pastors want to pretend as if they don't have to do that. And to do that would make them Republicans.
Right.
And so that's their excuse. That's their false objection to not doing their job.
You're exactly
That's the
right.
point I make.
Yeah.
And it's their fig leaf. And so what happens is they end up importing a lot of that belief system into their churches. And I've had this conversation with several pastors over the last few years. If you went, let's remove America from the equation. Okay. If you went to some third world country as a missionary, and when you arrived, there was a pagan religion that had dominated that community, that village for a generation, so that the water supply you're tapping into, all right, the human resource supply you're tapping into, whether they go and perform the rituals of that cult or not, they're all infected with it. They're all influenced by it. It's been the leading depositor of influence, the leading hub of influence in that village years before you arrived. Mm-hmm. If you went there and just, hey, I'm going to build my tent, we're going to do some revival, I'm going to preach the open air, open the Bible, preach the word, and I just preach the Bible as a standalone construct, and I never directly confronted the baggage that the people I'm preaching to are bringing into my ministry, would that be an effective methodology of evangelism? No. In fact, what is most of the New Testament? When we get done with the Gospels, the rest of it are frankly letters, epistles, written by Paul, John, Peter, James, Jude, addressing the cultural rot gut that was influencing the communities. They were just called Colossae, Corinth, Philippi. That they were specifically who are the Judaizers? Mm-hmm. Who was the woman coming from the pagan temple? Who's the guy in the front row with his arm around his mom that Paul's talking about? Right. These are specific people, specific movements. They're not generalities. They're not constructs. They are directly addressing, and Paul looks at one of them and says, "You're a son of the devil."
Right.
They are directly confronting that which is leading the people astray. That they didn't want to kill Paul in Ephesus because he believed in the third way.
Right.
He
That's right.
made tent for 9 hours a day, and then at night preached the gospel.
Right. In Ephesus, they literally even said, we're in danger of losing our livelihood.
Yes.
It's actually,
they understood.
It's affecting the religion to the point where
yes.
it's affecting the economy, our economy.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a threat.
Yes.
Christ was a threat.
Yes. And so I honor the instinct of not wanting to be the next generation of pastors completely used, abused, and ridden hard and put away wet by the Republican Party. I'm all in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But is that your real concern? Or is it a false objection excuse for you not to confront the spirit of the age?
Mm-hmm.
And it's your fault, frankly, that that the spirit of the age is largely embodied in a political party because you didn't confront this for a generation when it was a broader cultural issue. Back in 1998, Bill Clinton was signing the Defense of Marriage Act into law, and almost every damn Democrat voted for it. Okay? That was when you had a chance to stay out of politics directly and directly engage what was going on in the culture and restore moral universal absolutism. You chose not to do that. You chose to punt. You chose to go to a Rick Warren seminar on church growth.
Right.
Okay, you chose that. And so now what's happened is it's weaponized.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the fringes of San Francisco or the bowels of a college campus. It is weaponized in the full form of a political party. And there's only two of them that matter in America. And so we've got one of them given over to demonics, basically. Right. And that happened because the church chose a different path coming in the 90s and early 2000s than directly confronting this stuff. And to the point that it would be politically obscene for any mainstream Democrat outside of a place like San Francisco to embody this. Now they've become governor of Kansas saying this stuff.
That's right.
And that's because the church abdicated its responsibility to confront it when it was largely a quirky, abnormal, fringe moral movement.
Right.
And now it is mainstream and weaponized, not just even in the universities, but all of the government schools down to now we have drag queen story time hour at every public library that matters in America.
Yep.
And so now you have no choice. You cannot confront the baggage your people come to your congregation with, the lost come to you with. You cannot confront it without confronting what is said in left-wing media and what is said by left-wing politicians, because they are its acolytes. They are the shamans of that the church confronted in yesteryear. They are the high priestesses that the church confronted in yesteryear.
Right.
The idea that we're going to put naked men in locker rooms to rape our daughters and nieces and wives and sisters, that's a public policy from a political party. That's not some esoteric work of a naval ponderer with his own theological, ruminations that no one pays attention to. They're freaking doing that.
They're doing it. Yeah.
And they're doing it because you didn't dam the river at its source. So now the water's flowing downstream now, and it's got momentum.
Yeah.
And now it's fully weaponized within a modern American political party, the way it was. And that's just the Democrats. In another era, we would have called them Caligula. In another era, we would have called them Nero or Domitian. That's what we would have called them in another era. That they're just called Democrats today.
Right. Yeah. Everything you're saying is really good. Wait. Real quick, before you go, do me a favor. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell so you'll be notified with all our new content as it comes out on a daily basis. And if you're willing to support this ministry, you can do so by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. Thanks so much. God bless.